Okay, Nick Thompson, how did you become the holistic vet of the UK?
I don't think I'm the holistic vet of the UK, but I appreciate you saying. But I became a holistic vet because I was raised like that. My mother was a nurse, my father was a doctor, and so I was raised with really good nutrition, raised with homeopathy, with herbal medicine, and raised with a minimum of conventional medicine. So really, yeah, that's how I was raised. I went to vet college and I rejected that, and I thought I'm going to learn exactly how to do things properly. And then within a very short time of being in practice, in veterinary practice, I thought, aha, medicine as I could see it has only got so much to offer. And so I went back to my earlier roots with nutrition, with herbs, with homeopathy, and so that's really how I look at life and medicine with a very broad approach.
Okay, so there wasn't just one school where you went and you learned all this holistic stuff from there.
Oh no, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime thing. From very early on, we were kind of just raised in this form of medicine. My mother was a nurse, and she was into essential oils and reflexology, homeopathy, and these things. And my father, he was kind of into holistic medicine, although they didn't call it that at the time. And he would always use a minimum of drugs. Now that I think about it. And then when I came out of college, I learned primarily started with homeopathy, which is a very holistic form of medicine, and then got into raw food feeding, which is fantastic, and obviously that's very holistic in that you're treating all aspects of the body and all aspects of management of the dog. And then got into herbs and many interesting other things.
Okay, yeah, like anytime I meet a person who has this holistic or natural or in any way alternative view on health, there's always a very similar approach to nutrition also, which is almost the complete opposite of the official one, which is, whether we're talking about humans or animals, it's usually the official one is like mostly based on artificial ingredients, and they, or at least they're not gonna tell you that there is a difference between natural food and artificial food. They're not going to talk about food quality. And then when you go to the alternative world, the holistic world, the natural world of healing, then you're always going to talk about the food quality, and you're going to understand these things. So it's really interesting to meet you and hear all these things. When it comes to animal feeding, and pet food, how was the raw food thing back then when you got into it, and how is it now? It's probably changed a lot.
It's changed a lot. The last 10 years has been really exciting with raw food in veterinary medicine.
In the UK?
In the UK, yeah. And things are, I'm not sure exactly how things are in Finland, but whenever I come to Finland, I have incredible conversations with people. The guys at Mush seem to be very pioneering with their experiences and their what they're doing with raw food. When I first started, they were just people producing meat for dogs, and you'd have to then go to the market and get vegetables and put them together, and you get your fish oil.
There weren't really like big brands or anything.
There was no such thing as a complete raw food. Yeah, no complete frozen raw foods. But I was working with companies who we said, aha, why don't we? Let's make a complete. Okay, whatever that means, that's now, there's a lot to be said as to what a complete meal means, what a complete diet means. But yeah, that's where we find ourselves. FEDIAF talks about complete and balanced meals, and that's what many raw feeding companies are producing now, which is fantastic. It makes entry into raw food more easy for people, which is very, very good.
Nice. I wonder, what did dogs actually eat like 50 years ago?
What did dogs eat 50 years ago?
Yeah, or 100 years ago.
Okay, 50 years ago in England, they were eating tins of meat because it was cheap, it was easy. It had a picture of a dog on the outside, and nobody knew any better. Yeah,
Okay.
they looked at the television and it said, you know, buy Chappie, buy Pal, buy Chum, you know, pedigree foods, things like that. That's all they were told, and so that's what they fed. They fed tins and biscuit. Some of the
What was the biscuit?
The
made
biscuit
of?
was just wheat and flour.
Okay, so already back like 50 years ago.
Yeah. Even
Sort
then.
of like modern kibbles. Little
It's
bit.
similar, yeah. It's protein and you've got a carbohydrate, and you put them together, and that's okay. It's okay. Dogs don't die immediately of it, so that was okay. But then, if you go back 100 years, dogs were eating scraps. I
Yeah.
think, you know, you and I, we would eat some meat and we would eat some vegetables, and the dog would get whatever was left over.
Yeah, and some of it was cooked, some of it was raw.
Yeah, and they would scavenge. The dogs would go out into the village, and they would eat horse shit, and they would eat berries in the autumn, and they would eat, you know, they would steal meat and rats and what have you. So therefore it was a real variety of foods.
Yeah, I remember going to a very small farm once, and they had the most excellent eggs that I've ever tasted. And I was interested in what do the hens or the chicken eat. So chickens, they were just roaming free there, and they were eating scraps and leftovers from people, but they were also eating whatever they could find on the yard, whether it's some crickets or some worms or
insects. Exactly.
Yeah, insects, yeah.
What do chickens eat? Chickens eat insects. We have chickens at home, and they ruin my lawn because they dig up the soil at the edge where we're supposed to be growing flowers and vegetables, and they chuck all the stones onto the lawn that I'm supposed to be mowing. Okay, so I promise you that the chickens eat insects, and they're the most wonderful machine because they turn insects into eggs which we can eat. It's a glorious system.
Yeah, I mean,
I love it. I love it.
I mean, if you want to talk about nutrient density, I don't think you can do much better than insects.
It's
so powerful.
Yeah, it is wonderful, and they turn it into the egg, which is, you know, it's perfect protein.
Yeah, and I think that the question like what do animals or say dogs eat naturally, it's a little bit silly question, because the framework of where we come from with that question is the kind of framework where everything is very controlled. If you just let them be outside like before, like 100 years ago, they would eat anything.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
Yes.
They would have like amazing variety,
Yes.
much bigger variety than we could ever provide them, because they will go for that. They will go for the most nutrient dense things that they can find, and they will find all sorts of different things that we can't even imagine, unless we're like following them all the time, and still we're probably not going to find out everything.
Very similar, and I think that's exactly right. It's very important. There's a couple of things you said there. Number one is they ate whatever they could, and they scavenged just as people did. With people, we call ourselves hunter-gatherers, and with dogs we call them scavengers. But actually, they're about the same, except dogs are carnivorous hunter-gatherers, and humans are omnivorous hunter-gatherers. Yeah, and the other thing that you said, we're concentrating on what we eat, but what do we not eat? What about the fasting that we have every day, or maybe a number of days of fasting between meals? I think that is very, very, very important. For example, I always say to my clients that fasting is to the pancreas what sleeping is to the brain. Nice. Sleeping doesn't look like a very constructive thing to do, but actually it allows your brain to rest, and it's very important to brain function.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of function. It's lack of function to allow function. And equally, I think fasting is anti-nutrition to allow nutrition to work appropriately, to interact with the body most effectively.
That's very well said. Like Olli Posti in his lecture said that humans have always fasted, humans have always been sometimes in ketosis, and they have always moved, and nowadays we don't usually do any of those, except maybe Sambu does some weightlifting. And also you talked about in your lecture yesterday about 10 out of 10 stools, like the perfect poop. And you said that the dogs, they might fast for a day, and then they might eat like half of their own weight of some raw meat.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they get like the perfect stools.
Yes.
And when you just keep eating them like hour after hour, some strange artificial kibbles, they don't get the perfect stools.
Oh no. And interesting to pick up what you said there. Do dogs eat meat? No. Dogs do not eat meat. They are not actually carnivores. They are mousivores, birdivores, deerivores,
Yeah.
shitivores. That's what they eat. Yeah. Am I allowed to say shit on this interview?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. It's one of the realities of life. Yeah. Nutrition this end and stool the other end. Yeah. And so if you eat perfectly, the stool is very good. And having a good stool is a reflection of good gut function and good microbiome function, which is the ultimate reality. You know, it's so important, and which is why I'm very frank about these things. Yeah, I talk about food a lot, I talk about poo a lot, and I hope I do for many years to come.
Yeah. Do you think we have some hope for our little mousivores and birdivores and insectivores?
Totally. Yeah. And the closer we can get it to these things, to produce chews with fur on I think is a very good development in the right direction. There are companies in the UK who are beginning to do this, but what we're doing, I describe it as going back to the future. The future of nutrition is looking back at where we came from. What were our dogs eating 1,000 years ago, or even 15,000 years ago? And I know, here's a really, really modern idea. Let's feed them that. Let's feed them the closest approximation to a mousivore, birdivore, deerivore diet. You know.